Hey, hi, who is this? It's me, Jill. Um, so I'm a VTuber and I got a new model. Isn't that nice? Don't I just look amazing? But we're not here to talk about that today, oh no. So, I make videos, sometimes. And as of late, I felt really bad about not making videos. And I recorded a bunch of them, and I'm gonna be uploading them. I don't know in what order I'm gonna upload them, if that's gonna be the first video you're gonna see as I come back or not. But we'll see. So, look at the gameplay. It's Elden Ring. I'm obsessed with that game. And it's God's sword from Berserk. So, as you can tell by the thumbnail of the video, perhaps, or the title or whatever, I'm gonna talk about Berserk a little bit, which might not mean good things because if you recall, but if you do not recall, you will also find out about now. I made a Berserk video about 2 years ago, I believe, and it had fine views, let's say. In that video, I essentially talk about why I dislike Berserk, which I do. Infamously, Jill, the Omukade VTuber, hates Berserk. Now, in my defense, I still stand by everything that I said in this video. At least the general ideas, I stand by them, but I do agree that the video was shit. I did not script it because I do not script my videos, but on top of not scripting it, I did not have a good idea of what I wanted to say, which is why the video quite possibly felt like a pointless rant, which is not great. So, if you could tell by the thumbnail of this video, this is not going to be some deep dive essay about Berserk. That would be coming later, but I'll talk about that later. Instead, I was recently working on an idea for a Berserk video. I think I mentioned it a few times before, and essentially the idea was that I wanted to go through Berserk from beginning to end, and I wanted to write down what I did not like about it and discuss it in a detailed video. But then, as you know, the mangaka of Berserk happened to die, and I had enough common sense to kind of not do it. I felt like the time was inappropriate for that. And then I kind of forgot about it, honestly. And recently, I was just kind of going through seinen mangas, and I kind of stumbled upon manga such as Berserk and Goblin Slayer, and I thought to myself, well, what about that Berserk video that I wanted to do all the time ago? And here we are. Now, the video that I keep mentioning, that is something that would require a lot of time. You see, I want to do it justice. I want to go it from chapter 1 to the latest chapter. I want to write down what I think, what I thought. I want to write down what I liked and disliked and why I liked and disliked it. And then at the end, I want to draw my conclusions and give explanations to my conclusions based on the notes that I took. So, quite obviously, it is a big undertaking, and unless you can dedicate about like what 6 to 8 hours a day to just reading Berserk and writing all of that down, it's going to take time. And there's not enough of you watching me for me to do it full time, so it's gonna take time. And so, let's say a year. Let's say 1 year from now, I might possibly finish this video, but for now, it's in the process. But before I do that video, I still wanted to get my ideas out because I do think that that video does not really explain my position that well. And so today, I would like to give a small introduction to my issue with Berserk and, in all honesty, with violence in seinen, which is why the video is going to be titled something along the lines of I honestly do not know the context of violence or the importance of violence or something of that nature. Because at the end of the day, I believe that this is the most inherent issue with Berserk as a manga. You see, Berserk is too violent. Now, of course, when I say that, a reaction of a lot of people might be, oh, you just do not enjoy violence, do not then read Berserk. To which I would say, please, you're 12 years old, go to bed, it's way too late. But giving a more serious answer, no, I do love violence, but it's important to consider something. And what we need to consider is the fact that violence does not have value by itself. You see, good things, happy things, have value by themselves because they're good and happy. When we see characters in a story being happy, it's good because happiness is inherently good. Which is why when you see an evil character being happy, it's not good, because now you have the added context of this happiness coming from a bad place, coming at the expense of others people's happiness, which makes it not good. Violence is inherently negative unless it has context. Violence needs context to matter, it needs a message. Which is why so many earlier horror movies were more valued than a lot of modern horror movies, because they told stories through violence. They sent a message. But a lot of modern horror simply uses violence as entertainment. And there is nothing inherently wrong with using violence as entertainment, but we'll get back to that in a moment. But it's not complex. And that is kind of one of the biggest issues that I run into with a lot of seinen and Berserk too. I'm not going to talk about other seinens here, obviously, because a lot of things I'm going to say about Berserk will also apply to other seinens, for example, such as Goblin Slayer, which is pretty much Berserk but worse. If Berserk has at least some redeeming qualities, in my opinion, Goblin Slayer has none. It's just shit. Please don't get me started talking Goblin Slayer. I genuinely hate it. I genuinely hate it. I dislike Berserk, but I respect at least some things about it, like some few things. Goblin Slayer I just hate. I think it's just dog shit, but I'm getting a little bit carried away here. Back to the topic. Violence has to have meaning. And I think that, for the lack of a better word, there's no meaning to violence in Berserk. Now, your answer to that might be, well, that's the case. The world of Berserk is inherently dark, fucked up, messed up, yada yada. To which I have generally two answers. First of all, do I look like a 12-year-old emo who wants to read about depressing stories? I have enough depression in real life, you know, with climate change, with fucking disparity between the rich and the poor, and so on and so forth. There's nothing wrong with dystopian stories, there's nothing wrong with darker themes, with tragic themes. One of my favorite movies ever is, as you would know if you watched my Twitch streams, Blade Runner. Which is far from being happy. But it's important to understand that Blade Runner does have happy moments, does have something that is not dark, does have moments that are not just dark, and most importantly, Blade Runner tells positive stories through its darker themes. But we're gonna get back to that in a moment. If the world is just dark and depressing, why would I want to read about it? And a second follow-up to that, when the world is just dark, it hurts the story. You see, if the default baseline expectation is that everyone will fucking die and hurt, then why should I care about anyone? Why should I care about any character introduced if I know that they will die a horrible death? Why will I connect emotionally with the character if I know for a certainty that the most likely outcome is that they're gonna die? It creates a disconnect from the story, because if I know that everything sucks, why should I give a fuck? And that's a problem, because it turns a story into this gore fest, into this fucking pretty much gore porn, where you simply go from one scene to another. And the problem is that it needs to escalate, because you become desensitized to the violence, which is why violence needs to get more and bigger with every time to get a reaction. At this point, the violence is being done simply for its own sake. It's being done to get a reaction out of you. It's not being done to tell any story or send any message or showcase something artistic. It is simply done to get a reaction out of you, to get the wow out of you. And I thought we critique modern horror movies for doing the same thing. I thought that the modern Texas Chainsaw remake was fucking dog shit because of that reason specifically. But it also hurts the bad guys. You see, I like complex characters. I like complex villains. There's no complex villains in Berserk. Villains in Berserk are the worst they can ever be, because they have to meet the ever-increasing demands of violence, which makes them boring. It makes them comedically fucking evil. It makes them so comedically evil that sometimes when I read Berserk, it felt like I was reading some sort of inverse of Teletubbies, or whatever you call them in English, where everything just sucks instead of being happy and good. Why should I give a fuck about any monster introduced if they are just the worst version that they can be? It's tropey, it's cliche, and it makes villains boring, because every villain and every monster simply becomes a bag of meat for guts to kill, and then you move on. It's boring, it's not interesting, it's fucking annoying. Let us talk about Griffin for a second. Griffin, a lot of people love him. There are actions which characters can take, which can be so abhorrent and so comedically evil that there's no going back. What Griffin did was so evil that any complexity that writer tries to include in the story for him later on falls flat, because I simply wish to see him die. I do not care about any pain or tragedy or any feelings that Griffin might be going through, because he committed something that was so evil that the only thing I wish to see from him is death. And that makes a character boring. That kills any complexity that a character might have, and that is not good. Violence has to have meaning and has to have context. You see, back in the day, in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, everything was very PG. Everything still is, but it was more PG back then, which is why mature stories became synonymous with complex story, which is why often when mature stories had violence, violence became synonymous with complexity. But we live in 2022, not 22, not 1992. We live in 2022. Violence does not mean complexity in terms of storytelling or anything else. Simply adding violence does nothing. In fact, quite often, simply putting violence into the story, expecting it to add complexity, does the opposite. It simplifies the story. It showcases the lack of skill on the part of the writer. it also showcases a very outdated view of people. You see, female characters in Berserk exist as rape baits. They do. Whenever there's a female character in a Berserk, they're either getting raped or you think about when they're gonna get raped. Because that's the norm. And that's bad. Stepping back a little bit and looking at the story from a meta perspective, so to say, it showcases an extremely outdated cliche and just bad view of women. Women exist to be raped and to be saved by men, or for men to take revenge upon monsters for the rape being done upon them. It feels cheap. It feels dirty. It feels disgusting and not satisfying at all. Now, you might say that this is realistic, that this is how it is in real life. To which my first answer would be, no, men also get raped. They do. And you can go fuck yourself if you do not agree with that. And second, why are we suddenly talking about realism? What the fuck about Berserk is realistic? Why do you suddenly bring up realism? It's a story about fucking demons. Are demons real? No, demons are not real. So if demons are not real, why are we suddenly talking about realism in respect to women being raped so much in the story? I do not give a fuck how realistic it is. It's dog shit. It is dog shit. I don't care if it's realistic or not. It has no importance in the discussion. We're not talking about how realistic it is because the story of Berserk is not trying to be realistic. That point is irrelevant. Now, of course, you might ask me, Jill, if the roles were reversed, would you be fine with that then? And I essentially have two answers to that. On one hand, no, because it would lead to the same conclusion. You would still have too much pointless violence which would disconnect the reader from the story. But on the other hand, I would say that it would be a little bit better because it would be a little bit cliché and it would be a little bit different. The context of the situation would be different because the context of women and men in their lives in the real world is different, and therefore the way they interact with stories is different. No offense to anyone enjoying Berserk, but you have to be fucked in the head to read Berserk and genuinely enjoy all the rape that is being done. But if you do not enjoy and you simply power through those moments to enjoy the good bits of Berserk, then you're just coping. You're just ignoring the bad bits to enjoy the good bits. You know who else ignores the bad bits of the story to enjoy the good bits of the story? Shonen fans. And I thought that we critiqued shonen fans for that. I thought that we critiqued the fans of shonen for closing their eyes to problematic parts or the boring parts or the cliche parts of the story and simply focusing on the good parts. So why now we're simply ignoring the obviously bad, the obviously uncreative parts of Berserk to simply try and enjoy the good parts? At the end of the day, violence and rape in Berserk is done as entertainment. Everything gets killed, and at the end of the day, Berserk just feels like a bunch of characters stuck in a blender, which takes any complexity from the story. It simply makes you not give a fuck about the story. And women are used as props to be raped. The only character whose trauma you really explore is Guts. That's it. Everyone else? No. And it's bad. And it's stupid. It's very stupid. It is very outdated to simply put violence into your story as entertainment. And I think that is my biggest issue with Berserk. It is too dark and too violent and too rapey to the point where it betrays the lack of skill on the part of mangaka. Not to speak ill of dead people, but I also don't give a fuck, so I will. It's not creative. Berserk is simply not creative, and any creativity that Berserk does have is buried beneath all of this violence that just disconnects you from the story. Why should I care if the baseline expectation is misery? So those are my thoughts. This is probably not gonna be a longer video, unless it is, but those are my thoughts. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, there will be at some point a much longer video where I will go into greater detail. But here today, I wanted to discuss the importance of violence, and I hope that I did it good. I hope I conveyed my idea well, which is that violence needs context. Violence by itself does not mean complexity. There's a lot of stories which are not violent or not openly violent, yet are still tremendously complex. Blade Runner, for example, which I mentioned earlier, is not really that openly violent, yet it's an incredibly complex story. Full Metal Alchemist, one of the best anime ever considered by many people, is not really that violent, yet it is tremendously complex. And the few extremely violent and miserable moments that it has are few far in between to highlight how miserable they are. Because if you do them too much, they lose meaning. If you do them too much, you showcase the fact that you do not understand the complexity of what you're working with. And this is why, or at least this is one of the reasons, why I could never enjoy Berserk. Because I do not think that Berserk treats violence in mature, complex, or interesting way. But you know who does? Murcielago. There you go, baby. You knew I would do that. That's how I plug Murcielago into my video. Go read it, you son of a fuck. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did enjoy the video, I hope that you at least watched it. I need those views, you know what I'm saying? Dab. But if I could take a moment of your time, I would like to present today's advertiser, me. I have a Twitch channel and I like streaming on Twitch, but I don't get a lot of viewers, which can be quite depressing. Which is why maybe you can hang around sometimes. I play RPGs and shit, a lot of Final Fantasy XIV, and I talk a lot about philosophy or entertainment or whatever. Consider checking it out. It's nice. And I'll see you around. Hopefully sooner than half a year from now. Bye.